It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mohamed Enab, speaking to us from his home, I assume, in Fayoum, right? Fayoum, Egypt, yes. So Dr. Enab is an assistant professor of Islamic archaeology at Fayoum University in Egypt, and he has been there since 2020. Before that, he received his BS in archaeology from Fayoum University and completed both his MA and PhD at Cairo University with an emphasis on the Ottoman heritage or Ottoman mosques in Sana'a, Yemen. His academic career has featured research on Yemeni architecture, Islamic archaeology in the Arabian Peninsula, Ottoman art and architecture, and the heritage of Muhammad Ali Pasha, of the Muhammad Ali Pasha era in Egypt. I should have said before I introduce Dr. Enab that I will introduce each of the speakers in turn, and that way you can remember and be dazzled by who they are and what they have to present to you. So, Dr. Enab, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much. Is the sound clear for everyone?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sumaiya, for this introduction for me. I am very happy to see you again since last year's conference. Good afternoon for everyone. In the name of Allah, my name is Mohamed Enab, and I am pleased to be here with you today. And I would like to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation and my sincere gratitude to all members of the Abu Sulayman Center for Global Islamic Studies for their generous support and for making this important gathering possible. I also extend my heartfelt thanks to all of organizers of reclaiming history, Islam, and culture, patrimony in the 21st century for their efforts in bringing together such successful and timely conversation. I am truly thankful for all your efforts and honored to be part of this community. Although I truly wish I could attend the conference in person, I am grateful for the opportunity to connect with you virtually and to share my work in this unifying space. It's a true an honor to contribute to this dialogue with my presentation titled Reclaiming History, the Impact of Political Conflict on Yemen's Cultural Patrimony, Heritage Preservation through Active and Reactive Approaches. Actually, the idea of my research topic began during my doctoral fieldwork in Yemen in 2011. Prior to the revolution and the subsequent devastation, I had the opportunity to document many archaeological sites across the country. I admired the Yemeni architecture and art. Through this experience, I came to daily appreciate the Yemeni people's profound connection to their heritage. They are a people of remarkable civilization and archaeological awareness with a genius love for their culture and history. This culture is beautifully echoed in the word of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him. The people of Yemen have come to you. They are the most tender-hearted and soft-hearted. Faith is Yemeni and wisdom is Yemeni. But it is the war and political conflicts that destroy everything. In this slide, we can see a Yemeni boy stands amid the ruins of old Sana'a, holding a sign that reads, Yemen heritage is being destroyed, a powerful call to save a vanishing legacy of Yemen. I will speak on my presentation about some items like this slide. My aims of the study to highlight political and religious differences in Yemen and its bad negatively on Islamic archaeology in Yemen. Also raise awareness to increase understanding of the impact of Yemeni's political conflict on culture, heritage preservation for reclaiming history of Yemen. Also to discuss proactive and reactive approaches to heritage preservation in conflict zones. Also to explore logistical and financial and security challenges faced in heritage preservation efforts. Importance of my study to understand the impact of conflict on heritage preservation. As you know, it's important for safeguarding Yemen's culture, identity, and historical continuity. Also, to highlight the importance of preserving Yemen's cultural heritage, as you know, also it contributes to the protection of the humanity's shared heritage. Also to explore strategies for heritage preservation in conflicts zone. Now I will present a brief overview about Yemen's political conflict. Yemen's political conflict began in earnest in 2015, but its roots stretch back to historical divisions and political instability following the Arab Spring in 2011. The conflict involves a struggle for power between various factions, leading to a severe humanitarian crisis and extensive damage to the country's infrastructure, including its cultural heritage. What are key factions involved in Yemen? As all of us know, Houthis movement, Zaydis or Houthis rebels, which were concentrated in northern of Yemen. The Yemeni government, Southern Transitional Council, also Saudi-led coalitions. This is a map showing the location of the conflicted parties in Yemen. And showing complexity of situation in Yemen. Also, this one showing us the extent of the severe divisions in Yemen. This is a timeline of major events that have taken place in Yemen since the outbreak of the revolution in 2011. As we can see, this is a timeline from break of the revolution of 2011 and up till now. What about the historical significance of Yemen's monuments? Yemen, often referred to as Arabia Felix, 14th Arabia, boasts a wealth of culture and historical sites that reflects its long and diverse history. Its strategic location at the crossroads of ancient trade routes have contributed to a rich blend of cultural influences. The most famous key monuments concentrate on old city of Sana'a, Shibam Hadramaut, which was known as the most famous skyscrapers in the world, also Marib Dam. In this slide, we can see a chart indicating impact of wars on archaeological cities in Yemen. As we can see, Shibam, Sana'a, Zabid, Marib, Aden, and the kind of damage, whether partial or totally or damage. This slide shows the total number of the damaged archaeological and historical sites and monuments in Yemen. It's about 9,812. The number is subject to increase because the conflicts, the situation in Yemen still and also showing the forms of the destruction, whether total or partial, as we can see, and also showing the type and the number of the monuments that were destroyed, either houses, fortresses, museums, mosques, cemetery, and domes. We can know the forms of the destruction that have occurred on the Yemeni heritage: destruction of archaeological sites, destruction of archaeological different buildings, destruction of archaeological museum and archaeological artworks, and resulted in smuggling of these archaeological artifacts, especially rare Yemeni manuscript outside Yemen. There are some example about destroyed archaeological sites and monuments. What is the impact of the conflict on heritage sites? For example, old city of Sana'a, which was known for its unique architecture with interactive decorated buildings. After conflict, multiple strikes have damaged or destroyed historic building, causing loss of cultural heritage and displacement of residents. Another example, Shibam Hadramaut, was also known as well preserved example of vertical urban planning with ancient and mud brick skyscrapers. After conflict, it was affected by flooding due to lack of maintenance and conflict-related disruption, leading to structural damage. Now I will present a famous example of heritage sites affected by conflicts in Yemen. As we can see, Marib Dam. Marib Dam is considered one of the most engineering water building in Yemen in 5th century before century. We can see another historical site in Yemen called Al-Qasimi Nibot Hod, an old city of Sana'a. It's located in southern western part of the city. It was completely destroying about eight ancient houses, and several damaging surrounding building, including mosques and other structure. This picture before destroy, and the left one after destroy. Also, this building, the El Hadi Mosque in Saada city. Saada city is considered the main stronghold of Zaidi Imam of Yemen. It's a part, as you know, Zaidi is a part of one of branches of Shiite doctrine. We can see the destroying many elements of the mosques, like minarets, like entrances. Another example, Al-Qahira Citadel in Taiz. It's considered one of the landmarks in Taiz. It dates back to the 5th century Hijri, to the Sulayhid dynasty in Yemen. It was one of outstanding example of Yemeni military architecture. It was affected by bombing, as we can see in these videos. Also, another example in Aden, tourists wharf in Aden, which is known as Wolf Wharf. It's one of the landmarks of Aden, which is located in Tawahi district. It was affected also by destroyed, as we can see. One of most examples that was affected by a conflict in Yemen, the National Museum in Taiz. The National Museum of Taiz, it is one of the famous building in Taiz. It was a palace of Imam Ahmad Hamid ad-Din, and was one of the Ottoman building in Yemen, served as a military hospital in the second presence of Ottomans in Yemen. It also destroyed by bombing and conflict in Taiz. The danger of destruction of Taiz mosque that many of the artifacts and manuscripts, about 1,000 manuscript copies of Quran of this museum, are destroyed, as well as stolen and smuggled out of Yemen. In this slide, we see the effect, the bad effect of the destruction and fires that destroyed treasures of Yemeni manuscript. Actually, it's really very sad and painful. Also, another museum was bombed and partially destroyed, is the military museum in Aden. It dates back to 1980. It was a primary school and converted into a museum during Zaidi Imam rule. The most Yemeni museum that were completely destroyed is Zamara Regional Museum, which contain more than 13,000 artifacts that represent the rich heritage of Yemen. As we can see, it was completely destroyed. Another famous example, it's a church called St. Francis of Assisi in Aden. It was the seat of the Roman Catholic of Southern Arabia between 1892 and 1974. It was also destroyed and burned, as we can see. What should be done to preserve Yemeni rich heritage? The answer is to making action about proactive approaches to heritage preservation. Proactive preservation means measures which taken to protect, document, and maintain heritage sites before they are threatened or damaged. These approaches aim to prevent damage, ensure preparedness for potential threats, and facilitate swift restoration when necessary. Some example of proactive approaches like documentation by making a detailed recording of heritage sites through photographics, drawings, and writing descriptions. This ensures accurate records exist for future restoration and for historical archives. Some methods of documentation, like traditional documentation methods, including detailed survey and architectural drawings. Another example of proactive approaches is digital preservation, use of digital technologies to record and preserve heritage sites. It creates precious, scalable, and accessible records that can be used for virtual reconstructions and research. Some example like 3D scanning, photogrammetry, and geographical information system, GIS mapping. One of the most famous example of digital preservation is like digital documentation of threatened heritage site as we know is a pioneer company project for using 3D recording technology to preservation heritage. Also, one of the very important thing is international collaboration between countries, international organization, and local communities to protect cultural heritage. This provides resources, expertise, and political support to enhance preservation efforts by funding technical assistance and policy advocacy, like UNESCO, ICROM. Now I will speak about reactive approaches to heritage preservation. Reactive preservation means actions taken to address damage and protect heritage sites after they have been affected by conflict, natural disaster, or other threats. These measures aim to stabilize, repair, and restore sites to prevent further damage. Like emergency interventions, it means immediate actions taken to stabilize and protect damaged sites from further harm. It prevents additional damage and ensures the safety of the remaining structure and artifacts, like using of scaffolding and traps to protect a bomb damaged building, like the old city of Sana'a. Also, second example of reactive approach is restoration projects post damaged. It means long-term efforts to repair and restore heritage sites to their original conditions. It helps to restore culture and historical value, support community identity, and promote tourism. This will be done by reconstruction using original materials and techniques or modern methods when traditional materials are unavailable. The most famous example of restoration projects in Yemen, reconstruction of the Great Mosque of Sana'a, also the Great Mosque of Saada. In this slide, I will present some example of reactive approach heritage preservation. In this slide, Al Qasimi near Port Hood, it's one of the oldest district in Yemen. There are restoration efforts for heritage building by collaboration between the general organization for the preservation of historical cities in Yemen and the local international heritage organization, as we can see on the app after damage. And this is the restoration efforts reactive approaches of Yemeni heritage. We can see also in this slide some collapse of section of El Qahira Castle in Taiz. This is some efforts to restore it. The key participants in the project to restoration Qahira citadel, including heritage of for peace and the General Authority for Antiquities and Museums in Taiz and other organization. Also, another restoration project in Yemen for restore Al-Mansuriya school in Jub in Yemen. As we can see, there are using some of digital documentation like 3D and like maquettes of the madrasa. In the slides, in the left image, another view of the damaged historical building in Taiz. It's the Military National Museum in Taiz. In the middle, the National Museum in Taiz lays a ruins bearing the scars of conflict and neglect. And in the right, it's a beacon of restoration, Taiz National Museum after making a restoration project of we can see in this slide efforts of restoration of Yemeni buildings by efforts of local organization and Yemeni people using scaffold and straps, as we can see. In the following slides, I will show you a number of restoration projects that were carried out in cooperation with international institutions and organizations and local communities institution in Yemen, like this slide, and also this. Also this. But people and organizations concerned with heritage still face some challenges in heritage preservation during conflict, like logistical challenges, financial challenges, security challenges, difficulty of obtaining accurate information about buildings of Yemen. Some future strategic for heritage preservation conflict zones in Yemen, potential future strategic for heritage preservation in conflict zone in Yemen, like digital documentation and virtual preservation, capacity building and training, community-led heritage and management plans. Including reclaiming history is not just about restoring building or preserving a manuscript. It's about affirming identity, resilience, and the right to cultural memory, especially in places like Yemen, where conflict threatens not only lives but legacy. Through both proactive and reactive strategies, we can begin to envision a future where heritage preservation is not an afterthought, but a fundamental part of how we respond to crises anchored in community, supported by policy and guided by global solidarity. This work is not easy and it is far from finished, but it matters daily because every manuscript and memory preserved is a quiet act of resistance and a bold claim on the future. Thank you once again to the Abu Sulayman Center for Global Islamic Studies and the organizers of Reclaiming History for providing this platform, and thank you for listening, reflecting, and perhaps most importantly for getting the. Thank you so much.
Well, that was a fascinating presentation and a feast for the eyes, and also so much statistical information that's really helpful in kind of getting a sense of the scale of destruction in Yemen, sadly. We'd like to now move on to our next speaker, the newly minted Dr. Mohamed Fiky, who just received his PhD from Georgetown University. His work has been on institutions of violence in Fatimid Egypt, and he has explored that in his recently defended dissertation. He also holds an MA in Middle Eastern and North African Studies from the University of Arizona, and a BA in Languages and Translation from Al-Azhar University in Cairo. Mohamed, or Dr. Fiky, has also served as a teaching assistant at Georgetown, previously taught Arabic at Colby College, and is now contemplating what I'm sure will be a very brilliant future. So let me turn over the mic to Dr. Fiky.
Thank you, Dr. Hamdani, for your generous words. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohamed Fiky, as you heard. I'm working on Fatimid social history at Georgetown University. Today, I want to take you back to the 12th century Egypt, a time of dramatic political and cultural upheaval. We will be exploring a fascinating historical puzzle. The puzzle is what happens when a new regime actively tries to erase the memory and cultural imprint of its predecessor. Can memory truly be erased by an official decree? And how does it persist over time? Our case study for today focuses on the transition from the Ismaili Shia Fatimid Caliphate, which ruled over Egypt for 2 centuries, to the Sunni Ayyubid Sultanate, established by the famous Salahuddin, who died in 589. The Ayyubids initiated a comprehensive campaign aimed at dismantling Fatimid institutions and suppressing their Ismaili identity, effectively attempting to rewrite Egypt's cultural memory. Nevertheless, as historical sources attest, numerous popular practices and traditions rooted in the Fatimid period endured tenaciously across successive generations, even to the modern period, as we will see. But before we proceed, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizing committee for their efforts in bringing this conference to fruition, and for the opportunity to engage with esteemed international and US-based scholars from a range of institutions. I should also note that this presentation draws from research that is still evolving, so I very much look forward to your insights and suggestions on how to develop it further. Over the next 15 minutes or so, hopefully less since we were restricted as such, we will examine the vibrant cultural landscape shaped by the Fatimids, dissect the Ayyubid strategies of erasure, and analyze why this erasure was only partially successful. I'll be using the theoretical framework of cultural and communicative memory, primarily developed by Jan Assmann in his book titled Cultural Memory and Early Civilization, to argue that resilience of socially embedded popular practices reveals the limits of top-down attempts to control collective memory. The dramatic historical situation of a long-established cultural landscape facing deliberate attempts at erasure, yet showing signs of underlying persistence, naturally raises some fundamental questions for those interested in social history. For instance, how and why did certain ceremonial practices, certain monuments and palaces and historical sites clearly associated with the Fatimid era manage to survive for centuries after the dynasty fell? What enabled their continuation when the state that fostered them was gone? And conversely, why did other practices, perhaps just as visible under the Fatimids, fade away following the Ayyubid takeover? More broadly, how can we analyze the dynamics at play here? How do we understand the mechanisms behind this selective cultural continuity and change over time in post-Fatimid Egypt? To address these questions, we need a way to conceptualize how societies remember and transmit culture, especially across periods of significant political and ideological shifts. This requires us to look at specific analytical tools. And this brings us to our theoretical framework. To analyze this dynamic of erasure and persistence, we turn to the work of Jan Assmann, particularly his influential model of collective memory, as laid out in his book titled Cultural Memory and Early Civilization, which builds upon Maurice Halbwach's foundational insight in all memory is his foundational insight that all memory is fundamentally social. Assmann proposes a crucial distinction between two modes of collective remembering, which helps explain how different kinds of pasts are preserved and transmitted. First, we have cultural memory, which is the memory concerned with the society, with the society's foundational past, its origins, and the core narrative that shapes its identity. Crucially, cultural memory is formalized and institutionalized. It relies on specific carriers. Think of sacred texts, official histories, state-sponsored rituals and ceremonies, monuments, and specialists like priests, scribes, and scholars who maintain and interpret this memory. Because it is tied to these institutions and formal structures, cultural memory can be quite vulnerable to direct political intervention. Regimes can destroy texts, abolish ceremonies, or replace specialists. Contrasting this with communicative memory, which is the memory of the more recent past, the realm of the lived experiences shared among contemporaries through everyday interaction, conversation, and social routines. It is informal, less structured. It is carried not by formal institutions, but by social networks, families, neighborhoods, communities, through oral tradition and shared practices. Because it is diffuse and embedded in the social fabric, communicative memory is much more resilient and harder for a state to control or erase directly. Now, these two forms are not entirely separate. They interact. Official cultural memory, like state festivals, can influence popular habits and become part of communicative memory over time. Conversely, practices kept alive through communicative memory can persist even when the original cultural framework disappears. When this happens, these surviving practices can then be reinterpreted or given a new meaning by the new dominant cultural memory. How does this framework benefit our understanding of post-Fatimid Egypt? Well, it allows us to differentiate between the Ayyubid attack on institutional Fatimid cultural memory, which was largely successful, and the persistence of popular practices rooted in the more resilient communicative memory of society. It helps us explain why Salah ad-Din could erase official doctrines and ceremonies, but was not entirely successful in eliminating deeply embedded popular customs like the al-Mawlid, or certain practices like the sugar statues, like the bride and the horse, that was passed down in history even to the modern period. This distinction is key to understanding the limits of cultural erasure and the complex ways societies remember and adapt. Going back a little bit, working on Fatimid social history simply leaves one in awe and appreciation. A minority dynasty ruling a majority Sunni and non-Muslim population for over 2 centuries is no small feat. And while the Fatimids are not recorded in the chronicles that I've read, at least, of forcing or soliciting mass conversions to Ismailism, except in specific, with specific exceptions, of course, they have certainly left an indelible mark on Egyptian history and culture. Now, using the framework we just discussed, the cultural memory and communicative memory, we can interpret this indelible mark. The Fatimids meticulously constructed and maintained an official Ismaili identity through various means. Basically, they promoted their identity through a number of ways, such as the established powerful and state institutions, including Ismaili missionary, the Da'wah, along with caliphal court and administration. They also orchestrated grand public ceremonies and festivals, like the processions displaying the caliph's authority, or the Shi'i commemorations like Ghadir al-Khum and Ashura, or participating in non-Muslim festivals such as Eid al-Ghatas or Epiphany, or public local festivals such as the opening of the canal or Fath al-Qana, marking the annual inundation of the Nile and the commencement of agricultural season. If you'd like to read more about this, I recommend reading Paula Sanders' Ritual and Society, which is an amazing book for this specific point that I just mentioned. Crucially, the Fatima did not just impose this memory or this cultural memory from above. They actively sought to integrate their official cultural memory with existing communicative memory of the populace. As Karen Williams highlights, with the allied shrines in the Karafa cemetery, they invested in sites already holding popular significance, linking their dynasty's legitimacy to figures revered by many Egyptians. Furthermore, Ensuring public witnessing and participation in state ceremonies aim to weave these official events in the lived experiences and the social conversations of the people. This strategy created a complex memory landscape where the Fatimid identity had anchors both within the formal structures of cultural memory and within everyday social practices, potentially sustained by the communicative memory. It is the dual embedding in institutions and in popular experience that sets the stage for the drama of the Ayyubid takeover and what happens when a new power attempts to dismantle this landscape. With the Ayyubid intervention, the military removal of the Fatimids at the hands of the Ayyubid under Salah ad-Din in 567 marked the radical turning point. Salah ad-Din's objective was not just political consolidation, but a complete religious and cultural reorientation of Egypt, away from the local Fatimid Caliphate to the distant Caliph in Baghdad, in turn allowing Salah ad-Din complete control over the local administration, as long as he guarantees nominal submission to the Sunni Abbasid Caliph. To achieve this, the Ayyubid launched what we can analyze using Osman's framework as a systematic targeting the key pillars of Fatimid culture and memory. Salah ad-Din swiftly dismantled the core Ismaili institutions, the Da'wah and the judiciary. This also included the closure of the renowned Al-Azhar Mosque. In its place, Salah ad-Din and his successors invested heavily in founding a network of Sunni madrasas across Egypt. And the madrasas, for those who are not familiar, are institutions designed specifically to teach law. And they were very prevalent in the East, and there were a couple of models during the Fatimids. But they were dedicated to Sunni learning as well. The highly visible official Fatimid ceremonies and public festivals, which had served to integrate the populace into their cultural memory, were also suspended, as noted by Ibn Tuwayr and Ibn al-Ma'mun, or significantly altered in terms of the colors used, the scale of the ceremonies, its exuberance, as noted by Al-Khashandi in his Subh al-Asha. The Ayyubids were less interested in the public ceremonies on the same level of magnitude as the Fatimids. The key symbols of sovereignty were altered as well, such as the Friday sermon, now named in the name of the Abbasid Caliph, erasure of the Fatimid Imam Caliph, erasing the Fatimid Imam Caliph. This crucial public declaration, coinage as well were altered, and also the physical landscape was not spared. Prominent Fatimid monuments and palaces, potent symbols of the rule, were often repurposed for the Ayyubid use, allowing decay or even dismantled, weakening their power as sites of memory. Other urban sites as well, such as the prisons, were repurposed as Ayyubid madrasas. Palace halls were also repurposed and distributed among the commanders of Nur ad-Din's army, who later became commanders of Salah ad-Din's army during his vizierate. Perhaps most devastatingly for the transmission of formal knowledge, the great Fatimid libraries or repositories of 2 centuries of Ismaili thought and learning were effectively dispersed or destroyed, some of which were also moved to Yemen before the Salah ad-Din takeover. In Osman's terms, these comprehensive actions demonstrate a clear strategy to erase specific cultural memory by destroying its institutional carriers, silencing its official rituals, overwriting its symbols, and eliminating its textual basis. The Ayyubids were remarkably thorough in dismantling this official state-sponsored layer of Fatimid identity. But the question remains, did this successful institutional erasure translate into a complete disappearance of the Fatimid influence from Egyptian society? Did attacking the cultural memory or eliminate all memory? This leads us to examine what persisted beneath the surface. So we have seen so far how the Ayyubids launched a comprehensive and largely successful campaign against the formal structure of Fatimid cultural memory, the institutions, the official texts, and the state-sponsored ceremonies. But was this the whole story? Did erasing the official layer eliminate all traces of Fatimid era from the Egyptian society and culture? Well, the historical evidence suggests not entirely. Despite the Ayyubid efforts, certain popular practices, festivals, and traditions clearly associated with the Fatimids proved remarkably persistent, continuing long after the dynasty's fall. But how do we explain the survival using the framework we discussed? Well, the key here, according to Osman's model, lies in the distinct nature and resilience of communicative memory. While cultural memory relies on vulnerable institutions, communicative memory is deeply embedded in the fabric of everyday social life. It is carried and transmitted through informal networks, within families passing down customs, among neighbors sharing stories, and through communities participating in shared activities like merchants and artisans benefiting from the activities as well as the public gatherings. And by that I mean applying the features and the skills that they have acquired during the Fatimids in producing the same results, which resulted in a continuation of that. Practices like popular ways of celebrating the Mawlid, for instance, specific local funerary customs, or devotional visits to certain shrines were not solely dependent on state decree or official text. They relied heavily on oral tradition and practices, on the memory embodied in repeated ritual actions, what Osman might call mimetic memory, and they often took place in spaces less controlled by the state, such as private homes, local markets, or the community hubs found in cemeteries like Al-Qarafa. Because communicative memory operates through these diffuse, decentralized social channels, it's much less susceptible to top-down erasure campaigns compared to the centralized structures of cultural memory. Salah ad-Din could abolish an official parade, but it was far harder to stop families from celebrating among themselves or visiting local shrines they revered, at least publicly, since he also imposed public constraints of practicing any Shiite or Shiite-affiliated social practice. So if these practices were held, they were most likely kept in private, and then over time, they started making public appearance again. A concrete example often cited, which appears in later sources like Al-Maqrizi, reflecting on the long-standing customs, is the persistence of making sugar statues or figures as part of the popular Mawlid celebrations, long after the official Fatimid ceremony ceased. This points to the survival of festive practice within the popular sphere, carried forward by these resilient social memory mechanisms. It is crucial, however, to understand that this persistence was not static. As these practices continued, sustained by the communicative memory, they were often subtly adapted and reinterpreted to fit within the new dominant Sunni cultural landscape. This wasn't just passive survival, it was a dynamic process of cultural continuity and change. So what can we conclude from this examination of post-Fatimid Egypt through the lens of memory studies? We have traced the Fatimid actively constructed a potent cultural memory, which they sought to integrate with popular experience. Then we saw how the Ayyubids launched a targeted and largely successful campaign against the institutions, official texts, and state-sponsored rituals that served as the primary carriers of the Fatimid cultural memory. However, this institutional erasure did not equate to total cultural oblivion. Practices rooted in the communicative memory, those that are embedded in everyday social life, family traditions, community rituals, and transmitted through informal networks, demonstrated significant resilience. Osman's distinction between the relative vulnerability of institutional cultural memory and the tenacity of socially embedded communicative memory provides an important framework for understanding this differential outcome. It helps explain why official erasure did not completely succeed. Crucially, however, This persistence was dynamic, demonstrating how practices sustained by communicative memory can be reshaped through adaptation and reinterpretation when overarching cultural memory landscape shifts. While communicative memory preserved the form and social habit of rituals, like the Mawlid or the shrine visitations, it did not dictate their meaning. Instead, by keeping practices alive, it made them available to be actively redesigned, resignified by agents within the new Sunni order, such as religious scholars, pragmatic rulers, or influential Sufi groups. This process stripped the practices of their specific Fatimid Ismaili ideological links, allowing them to retain popular appeal by finding new justifications and meanings within now dominant Sunni religious framework. Ultimately, this case study underscores the inherent limits of state power in controlling collective memory entirely. While regimes can profoundly reshape institutions and official narrative, which is the cultural memory, the memories and practices embedded within the social fabric, the communicative memory, possesses their own resilient modes of transmission and adaptation. The story of post-Fatimid Egypt highlights the dynamic interplay between official attempts at cultural engineering and the enduring adaptive power of popular traditions and socially transmitted power. Well, this is the last page of the presentation. And I thought it was interesting because when we look at how the urban spaces as well were sort of divided and structured, we notice here that the Fatimids, when they built Cairo, they didn't sort of isolate the palaces. The palaces were at the heart or shaped within the city itself. But when Salah ad-Din came in, he sort of demolished and repurposed these palaces, official palaces, and then he established his own citadel at the top of the hill. He wasn't to look down at the population. He sort of ruled rather than what the Fatimid model did, which is basically sort of try to live within and between. Thank you.
For that really kind of useful discussion of how memory and culture and heritage and history are preserved, reclaimed, repurposed. So many questions, come to mind. But before we get to those questions, our last speaker is Dr. Mahdi Touraje. I don't know if Dr. Touraje, are you sharing a screen or you're just speaking to us? Okay. So Dr. Touraje is associate professor of religious studies and social justice and peace studies at King's University College at Western University in London, Ontario. He holds a PhD and an MA in Near and Middle Eastern civilizations from the University of Toronto, and also has done undergraduate degrees in social work and sociology from York University. His research focuses on Islamic mysticism or Sufism, on Persian literature, the intersections of gender, sexuality, and postmodern theory. He's the author of Rumi and the Hermeneutics of Eroticism, and has published widely on topics such as Quranic interpretation, erotic symbolism in Persian poetry, feminist and psychoanalytic readings of Islamic texts. His most current research is very provocatively and interestingly titled Sufism of Two Wheels, which looks at the phenomenon of Sufism through motorcycling and modern philosophies. So many things, Dr. Touraje. But today, Dr. Touraje is going to discuss with us the politics of memory preservation in museums. The floor is yours.
All right. Bismillah. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you so much, Sumaiya, for this very kind introduction. I'm here in Canada. Apologize, really miss not being there with everybody else. But things as they are, I was not able to attend. Also, I have an exam at 2 p.m., our final exam, so I won't be able to attend the afternoon session, which I apologize. So hello and salam from Canada. I hope y'all, if I was there, I would ask people to raise their hands to see who has been in Toronto and has seen Aga Khan Museum, which has been operational for the past 10 years or so. But if you have not, then I really encourage you that it's worth price of the ticket just to come to Canada, Toronto, just to visit Aga Khan Museum. It is an impressive complex of 2 exhibition galleries, areas for art restoration, conservation, and storage, 300-seat theater, gardens, and about 1,000 objects. It showcases artistic, intellectual, scientific heritage of Muslim civilization across the centuries from Iberian Peninsula to China. Its permanent collection, the collection of which began in 1950s, includes 520 folios and manuscripts, 350 key pieces comprising of work on paper, metal, textile, wood, stone, glass, and lacquer. So I don't want to go on and on, just doing some plug-in for the place. Some background on museum in general, that European museum building projects that began in 19th century and were intimately linked to colonial and empire building projects of the time. Exoticized artifacts of the colonies collected by agents of the empire were brought to national capitals and housed in grand buildings to give colonialism its appreciated status and transform European cities into these imperial capitals. The birth of museum was a way of ordering the world in a scientific manner, which legitimized the imperial civilizing projects playing on the Orientalist fantasies of the unchanged exotic, quote, Orient. Now here enters Aga Khan Museum, which reverses this trend of displacing items from colonies to the colonial museums of European capital. It re-territorializes the colonial landscape, whereas cultural products of Islamic civilization were previously objects of the colonialist gaze and at the service of its self-assuring goals. In Aga Khan Museum, they are subjects of their own histories. They offer visitors a window into the artistic, intellectual, scientific heritage of Muslim civilization. They also push back against this iconoclasm and counter the narrative of Islam as an iconoclastic religion that does not tolerate representational works of art. For example, many commentators saw the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas that Trinidad referred to by the Taliban as reinforcing the widespread notion that Islamic culture is impeccably hostile to anthropomorphic art, or the Daesh destruction of ancient artifacts in Iraq. These examples are used to show Muslims are unfit for assimilation into the global culture of the modern world. Our Aga Khan Museum goes against such narrative of Muslim primitive backwardness by highlighting the artistic, scientific, and cultural contribution of Muslim civilization. It also counters the Orientalist image of Muslims as those who have no appreciation for historical artifacts and can be duped to sell their priceless ancient artifacts for pennies. And so what is wrong with the place? This is here I'm entering my critique of the Aga Khan Museum. Despite the fact that it provides a counter-narrative to colonial European museum building and claiming the power of archive for the Muslim subject, Aga Khan Museum still operates within the parameters of the civilizational discourse. You know, the same one that promoted by Samuel Huntington, where he argues that there are 7 civilizations and it comes down to the clash between the last 2, Islam and the West. Museums don't just house items of the past, but the process of archiving the past is indeed a process of meaning production. So museum building projects belong more to the field to the field of power than aesthetics. Every museum is implicated in a complex web of power relations that I intend to unpack here. In other words, the act of collecting is never random or innocent. Theorists of archive, quote unquote, point out that archive is always a place of consignment. Objects in the museum are signs that lack intrinsic meaning. Those who have the power to archive control the meaning generated by what is being archived. This is the archontic power of archive that is not simply about the power of collecting and classifying and displaying objects of the past, but shaping the living experience of the present. What is no longer archived in the same way is no longer lived in the same way, which means memory is a contingent product of archive and a contested category. Aga Khan Museum claims the archontic power of the archive for the Muslim subjects. It presents a different history of Muslims. Those who command the power of gathering, naming, and curating signs also command the way in which memory is constructed. In other words, memory is not pre-existing, nor is it the memory of an originary event. It is no a priori memory that can be recovered from collecting artifacts of the past. A history of memory is also necessarily a history of forgetting. We can't remember unless we forget. In studying memory, we should pay attention to absence, distance, witness, testimony, tradition, nostalgia, and forgetting. So here we can ask, whose experiences has been forgotten in establishing Aga Khan Museum? What memories are erased in the process of remembering the past and shaping the present of Muslim communities? In its transition from an eclectic private collection to a public archive, Aga Khan Museum, along with its artifacts and programs, become strategic resources through which a particular personal and communal identities are crafted and particular relations of power are established. In our late capitalist culture, where social relationships are mediated by conspicuous accumulation, display, and consumption of distinct sets of commodities, we may see these resources as quote-unquote commodities, necessary for the construction of group and self-identity. What is commodified in Aga Khan Museum, this is my argument, is more than the sum total of the building and its artifacts and exhibitions. What is commodified is, quote, difference. In Aga Khan Museum, commodification of difference is packaged as the sameness of the specific Muslim subjects, and this, I mean Ismailis specifically, who are successfully established in the past, in the West. The difference, the difference of sameness shows that many Muslims, like the younger generation Ismailis referred to in late Aga Khan's inaugural speech at the opening of Aga Khan Museum, I think it was 2014 or 15, though different in some ways, seek integration into the dominant political historical structures of power. The late Aga Khan, in his inaugural speech, said that this museum is, quote, a great venue through which younger generation Ismailis could integrate into society at large. He also envisioned it to be a place that, quote, commands the respect of visitors, a reference to the common Islamophobic notion that immigrants from majority Muslim countries are perceived to be unwilling or unable to integrate into liberal democracies. One message of Aga Khan Museum is that the Ismaili community has accumulated the requisite, quote, identity capital for negotiating Western society's class and racial boundaries, as well as codes of its bourgeois cultural practices. Here, identity capital takes the architectural form of a carefully managed and curated, visible museum. Aga Khan Museum does not produce inequalities in itself, but it does legitimize pre-existing ones and the reproduction of social hierarchies. The archontic power vested in this museum does not merely command their, quote, the respect of visitors. It demands entrance into the power relations that structure the society at large. We may even detect hints of good Muslim, bad Muslim here. Muslim subjects represented by this institution are different than many other, quote, non-white groups. They are model minority, an economically successful immigrant group specifically selected through an immigration system that privileges educated professional classes. The problem with model minority, of course, is that their success provides basis for denying the structural barriers that hold the undesirable minorities back. It also justifies the elimination of many government policies that were in place to benefit all minorities. Difference, therefore, becomes the organizing principle of social relations in Agha Khan Museum, turning it into an overvalued commodity vested with a surplus value that is exchanged for remapping social relations. In other words, difference is commodified and exchanged for a privileged position within society's opportunity structure. Surely we can appreciate the importance of Agha Khan Museum for Muslims in Canada and probably the West. It is quite an achievement to offer concrete counter-narratives to establish Orientalist discourse that situates Muslims as backward people stuck in the past and Islamic civilization as hostile to any work of art. Of course, all of us non-white immigrants, I'm talking about myself, all of us non-white immigrants are, quote, settlers of color. Therefore, we are all implicated in the unjust structure of colonialist settler power here in Canada and the United States. But Agha Khan Museum's representational practices is invested in production of memories, identities, histories, and overvaluation of differences in ways that is oblivious to this and perpetuates unequal relations of power. The problem with the Agha Khan Museum is that it deliberately implicates itself in constellation of power and fails to attend to power relations that are products and producers of archive. There are many ways to address shortcomings of this public Muslim institution, and some of it I'm going to mention here. Some of it is also in my book chapter, which my presentation is from, is already published, but is available on the ResearchGate or what's the other place, edu.edu. I forgot the name of it. Anyways, so these are some of the ways to address this shortcoming. One is critical pedagogy and fostering organizational instability, abandoning the authoritarian fantasy of mastery over representation. Besides, or instead of presenting a seamless architecture, an exquisite collection of arts and artifacts, gourmet food prepared by a celebrity chef served amid the quote, divans, stunning decor, meant to evoke the luxury of a private Syrian home in the early 19th century. These are, by the way, quotation from the museum's website. Instead of these, the museum can provide a transformative, liminal space of heterotopia. Heterotopia is not prefabricated, and its contours are not decided in advance. It is an unplanned space taking shape out of what people do, feel, sense, and come to articulate as they seek meaning in their daily lives. The task for museums that genuinely attempt to foster ethical, democratic, participatory, and reciprocal post-colonial practices is to create a contact zone. The vibrant sphere of contestation, where conflict is cultivated, and where different views can be usefully confronted. The importance of contact zones become apparent when we consider that public spaces in general are shrinking or entirely disappearing from the cities. Public spaces are increasingly corporatized, privatized, and relocated in for-profit spaces like malls, coffee shops, or the cyberspace. In most major cities, public spaces are under surveillance, often unsafe for dissidents, people who are poor, unhoused, undocumented, or with mental illness, or otherwise sexualized, racialized, or minoritized and under attack. Those Muslims who are systematically omitted from structures of power, Muslim poor or the refugees, for example, are among the groups whose peculiar subjective conditions leave them vulnerable to attacks by contemporary right-wing authoritarian populist movements. This, by the way, I wrote it in 2015, kind of like a prophecy that it's more relevant today than it was back then. But this is back when 2015. That's what I wrote this. I concluded that the strength of Agha Museum is in its potential to become a transformative space conducive to formative power of Muslim self and production of alternative radical subjectivities. In a world where Muslim minorities open a museum dedicated to Muslim heritage at the same time that Muslim extremists destroy ancient museums and their artifacts, the predicament of Muslims in the West is not a crisis of belief, but a crisis of memory. Without creative, conflictive openings within the archive's power structure, the Agha Khan Museum will miss the potential for becoming a post-colonial, ethical, democratic, participatory, perhaps even radical museum capable of reciprocal transformation. My fear is that Agha Khan Museum risks becoming a simulacrum, like a theme park, at best contesting the tired narrative of the Oriental other's primitiveness, and at worst, an expensive monument to another minority begging to be included in the exclusive white European colonial patriarchal club. Thank you very much.